Hello, my friends. If you'll remember, recently I had a talk with my therapist friend. Well, today we're going to talk to my scientist friend about GLP-1 or semaglutide and lymphedema, things that Amberlynn Reid tends to talk about quite a bit. But generally speaking, when she talks about these subjects, it leaves us going, wait a minute, is that right? That doesn't sound right. So today we're going to tap into a wealth of knowledge and see if we can kind of get to the bottom of it. And a couple things I want to make clear. He's not a doctor, he's a scientist, and he's going to go over his credentials here in a minute, but suffice to say, he knows what he's talking about. In fact, he is actually the biomarker lead in a clinical trial for GLP-1 right now. And after the interview was over, I had a few follow-up questions and stuff, so I reached back out and he sent some video answers. So you'll see those throughout the interview, and that's why those sections look a little different. And of course, this video is for educational and entertainment purposes only. This is not meant to be medical advice. So, without further ado, let's have a word with my scientist friend. If you'd like to like and subscribe, that would literally be hectic. I'm not gonna lie. To start off with, just tell me a little bit about yourself, because we're gonna be talking about GLP-1 and lymphedema and all kinds of stuff. And so tell us what you know about that and why you are an authority on the subject.
I'm a biomarker scientist here in Switzerland. I'm from the US, as you can probably tell originally. I have my background is immunology. My master's is in immunology. It's a subject that's near and dear to my heart. My PhD is in pharmacology, which is part of me being a biomarker scientist. I've been in so I started off in academia, but I moved to industry, and I've been working in industry since 2007 in drug development, mostly in the biomarker space. And for the most of that time, I was working on autoimmune and inflammatory conditions. Once again, the immune system near and dear to my heart. But in the last couple of years, it's kind of come increasingly clear that obesity and obesity-related illnesses are a major cause of shortness of life and lack of quality of life. And so, I made the pivot, and now I'm a biomarker scientist in cardiovascular metabolism, CVM. And ironically enough, one of my main projects right now is I'm the biomarker lead for not semaglutide, but a GLP-1 receptor agonist.
And in a little bit, he's going to explain what agonist means in a little bit more detail, but just to kind of give you a quick idea, because you're going to hear it a few times. If something is being agonized, that means it's being stimulated. So the GLP-1 agonist is the substance that is stimulating the GLP-1 receptors in our body.
In that same class. And so I'm fairly familiar with what is known and what is not known about the mechanism of action of these drugs, these therapeutics, these peptides and non-peptide agonists in type 2 diabetes, which was sort of where they initially came into play, and then the sort of increasing constellation of other indications where they're having an efficacy, weight loss being just one of them.
You mentioned semaglutide and GLP-1. So tell me, what is, like, when somebody says GLP-1, is that sort of like an all-encompassing term to cover lots of different types of those kind of medications? Or what would be the different, like if I were talking about GLP-1 or like Wegovy or Ozempic, what would be the difference between those? Are they all pretty much the same, or do they fall under like a certain like umbrella, or how does that work?
Under a certain umbrella, but they are quite different. So GLP-1 itself is actually a peptide that we make. So GLP-1 stands for glucagon-like peptide 1. So the GLP-1 is a peptide, and it's a peptide that we knew about, but we didn't really, for a long time, couldn't really do much with it because it's got an incredibly short half-life, minutes.
And just in case you're wondering what half-life means, it's basically an estimation for the time it takes for a drug's initial concentration in your body to decrease by half. Now, there's a long explanation for why they use half-life instead of like whole life, but we're not going to get into that. So basically, the TLDR, a small half-life, just means it just doesn't last very long.
And so it doesn't really last long enough in the body or even in a cell, in vitro cell system for you to study. And the big turnabout came when somebody found in the saliva of the Gila monster a peptide called exendin 4, which turned out to be something that was kind of like GLP-1, but had a longer half-life. hours. And that was actually the first incretin ever approved as a drug. So it's called exenatide. And so there was that kind of led to people being interested in making these GLP-1 agonists that had longer half-lives that were more suitable for drugs. So they would act like the actual peptide does in the body. They would just last longer and have a more durable effect. Then a real breakthrough came with dulaglutide, but that was kind of eclipsed because right away there was semaglutide, which has a half-life which allows for weekly dosing. And that's the difference, the big difference. But the thing about, and not to get too much into the weeds, but I think this is very important, is the GLP-1 receptor, the actual thing that any of these molecules will bind to and actually activate, is expressed at a lot of interesting and different places in the body, but it's expressed at different levels. And so these things originally came around from type 2 diabetes because it's expressed at extraordinarily high levels in the 3 different cell types in the pancreas: alpha cells, beta cells, gamma cells. Beta cells are the ones that produce insulin, and they're the ones that really take a hit in type 2 diabetes. Well, so they're the ones that are attacked by the immune system in type 1 diabetes. And in type 2 diabetes, as you become insulin resistant, they just get so strained pumping out insulin, pumping on insulin, pumping on insulin, that they start to die. And that's what leads to type 2 diabetes. You just have this lack of insulin because these cells are so stressed out. And so the GLP-1 agonism, when you agonize, stimulate, we use the word agonist when we talk about something that stimulates a receptor, and antagonist, something that blocks it. So the GLP-1 agonists that stimulate the receptor actually make the beta cells more resistant to death, and it promotes their rejuvenation, and it promotes their insulin secretion. And it also has effects on the alpha cells and the gamma cells to, once again, support the beta cells and to also secrete other hormones that kind of aid and abet with blood sugar control. And so people thought, oh yeah, type 2 diabetes, that's an obvious one. And indeed, these GLP-1 receptor agonists are incredibly good at restoring what we call glycemic control in diabetics. And this is sort of the revolutionary breakthrough. But then they discovered, oh, these things mediate a lot of weight loss too. And so they're kind of going into the weight loss. But this is where, so my big thing is mechanism. How does the drug work? What does it do? What's the pathway? And actually some of the mechanism around how it mediates some of these other effects is still being clarified, elucidated. So it's the GLP-1 receptor is expressed in the intestine, and it's expressed on cardiomyocytes of the heart. It's expressed in chondrocytes and monocytes in the joints. It's expressed on adipocytes, on the actual fat cells. And adipocytes, ironically, are very active cells. They secrete these cytokines called adipokines that mediate inflammation and all sorts of other effects. And so we're still kind of teasing out some of these other effects that these drugs have outside of just glycemic control. And this, you see a lot of these sort of phase 3 trials for semaglutide that a lot of these other molecules that are competitors coming up through the pipeline are also doing these trials in for diabetic kidney disease, for all these heart-related cardiovascular potential issues, even for things like addiction, because it's also expressed in the hippocampus, it's expressed in the brain. And so we're still teasing out all these effects. When I said this is one of the most interesting molecules that I've worked on in almost 20 years of work in the industry, I'm not kidding.
Wow. Yeah. So beyond diabetes and beyond weight loss, they're still finding more things that the drug can help with, and they're kind of figuring that out as they go, I guess. Is that what's kind of going on right now?
Yeah, and so my job title is technically biomarker and experimental medicine. So I'm kind of leaning into the experimental medicine side to try to do some work in the background to sort of work on how these effects are mediated as these trials are going into these indications. There was recently a phase 3 trial showing that GLP-1 receptor agonism is very effective in restoring kidney function in diabetic kidney disease. Now they're seeing that it has very protective effects on the heart muscle. And then there have been some sort of post hoc work showing that it might, once again, this is all very preliminary, it might have some protection in Alzheimer's, but that's all very preliminary that people are still kind of teasing out and working on, exactly how it mediates these effects, what's secondary to weight loss, what's secondary to glycemic control, and what's primary due to the effect of the drug. So it's a very cool area of research, and so I'm excited, but of course, everything needs the experimental medicine and of course the clinical trials in order to really know what it's doing.
So you mentioned half-life and just kind of how long a drug lasts. And just, I got this question quite a bit when I made that community post. Amber had mentioned when she first, I think it was maybe her first or second time trying semaglutide, she mentioned that it had expired.
Last time I took semaglutide, it stopped working because the syringes I got were pre-filled, which you are not supposed to do that because when you pre-fill a syringe, it expires in 28 days. People make mistakes. 28 days is only 4 weeks. And for 4 weeks, the syringes were working. Week 5, I felt nothing. So that is when I doubled my dose.
It's possible that they expired. If they expired, it's because she wasn't ramping up. And I think it's very possible that she wasn't ramping up.
So chances are if they gave her a bunch of pens, they intended her to use those pens, before they expired, probably.
When I was doing semaglutide last time, I explained to you guys that the syringes were pre-filled.
She talks about pre-filled syringes once again. So when you get the actual stuff, either the Wegovy or the Ozempic, it comes as auto-injectors. And then you can probably get from, compounding pharmacies. They can give it in any sense. They can give it as a vial that you draw from. They have a wide latitude in how they can give it to you.
So thankfully, this time on semaglutide, it will not come pre-filled. It's going to come in the little thingy. I'm going to have to get the semaglutide out of the thing with the syringe by myself. Well, actually, my mom's going to help me with that because I get the anxieties about it.
And just kind of FYI, if you Google, can you get semaglutide in vials from med spas, the answer you'll get is no. According to Novo Nordisk, it says med spas in the United States are not allowed to sell semaglutide in vials. Novo Nordisk, the only company with FDA-approved semaglutide products, does not sell semaglutide to any entities for compounding or use in med spas. Their FDA-approved products like Ozempic come in a branded pen and are not available in vials with separate syringes. Now, when I read that, I thought maybe I got Amber in like a gotcha moment. But I reached back out to my friend here and he said basically what happened was during that time where there was a shortage, that's when the compounding pharmacies were able to do vials and kind of do however they wanted. But once the shortage ended, then the FDA discontinued the compounding pharmacy's ability to do that.
She never shows the syringes as far as I know because I don't watch her channel. I only watch her through reactors. But as far as I know, she never actually showed the syringes. She never showed a label. She never showed documentation on the up-titration scheme. She never even showed an expiration date. So it's very hard to tell. It's very hard to tell if they gave her anything, which I would think they would if they had any sense of responsibility whatsoever. I would think that she would actually be able to show it if she had it. It's kind of one of the things that Snowflake mentioned is that if she can prove something wrong as an easy win, she will. And when she just sits there and talks about it, probably she's lying. But yeah, without knowing what was in them, without seeing the label, without seeing the expiration date, it's hard to tell. It's perfectly compatible with the idea that she simply did not up-titrate and just never got to a point where it did anything and was just doing it for clicks and views, kind of like the WLS thing. But once again, it's really hard to tell.
So overall, the expired syringe mystery is probably best answered by maybe a doctor or a compounding pharmacy or something like that. But I will say this here. Everything that I've found when looking into this says that it's pretty unlikely that a med spa or compounding pharmacy would send home pre-filled syringes. And if they do, everything that I've seen says that's a red flag. That's probably not a great place to go if they're sending home pre-filled syringes. Because even the FDA says that no syringe is approved as a standalone storage container, meaning you can't just send them home with people with medication in them as a storage device. Now, that being said, during the semaglutide shortage, it was kind of like the Wild West for a little bit, where if a compounding pharmacy was going to be shady, that was their opportunity to do it. So I would love to know what med spa Amberlynn went to, because chances are it was probably not a reputable one, She probably went to some random person online that was like, hey, get your semaglutide here, So there's not really any way to know for sure what happened with the expired syringes, but something about that definitely seems fishy, because even when you see the way she talks about it, she's kind of got a little smirk like she's, got a little duper's delight. So yeah, there's something shady about it for sure.
And maybe here I can mention something about compounding pharmacies, because that's something that's come up as well, because they're kind of an interesting case. So compounding pharmacies are pharmacies that can take an active ingredient or even take the precursor to an active ingredient and put it in to a different formulation. And they're very important in some ways. So, sometimes people are allergic to an excipient, and an excipient is the thing that you mix with a drug to either take it in a tablet fill or inject it or whatever. Sometimes people are allergic or can't tolerate it, or sometimes a kid needs it and they need something better flavor, something like that, or they need a different strength because of something specific about them. And a compounding pharmacy can put it in a different format or can put it in a different dose. And so they're very useful there. But they're also they can be a little bit of an end run in some ways, because it's true that they don't have the same sort of FDA oversight of manufacturing, because they're not officially manufacturers, they're compounders. And so it is a little bit of an interesting area. And there have been some recent, once again, I'm not going to speak on it because it's out there, but there were some recent decisions made around where there are shortages of certain drugs of this class that compounding pharmacies were allowed to make. And recently it's been decided that they are not, but it's a moving picture. I'll just say that much.
Hey, this is Michael from the future cutting in, because I thought I was a little bit too coy with some of the stuff I was saying around compounding pharmacies. And so I just thought I'd clarify. So if a drug is declared in shortage by the FDA, then that opens up the possibility for compounding pharmacies to synthesize the drug themselves. I know she said it's not FDA approved.
I never will do semaglutide again. So semaglutide is not even FDA approved. I always ignored that little tiny tidbit because in my brain I was like, okay, if it's coming from pharmacies, and obviously the pharmacies know what they're talking about. But the more that people are using semaglutide, obviously the more that people are learning about semaglutide. And something that is like coming up a lot, like I've seen articles about it, like you guys have sent me articles. There's a lot of semaglutide like coming from the black market. People are getting extremely sick. People are getting scammed. And no matter where I get it from, it's just like, you never know what you're gonna get. So semaglutide is a no. But would I try Ozempic again, which is FDA approved? Yes. But it's like thousands and thousands of dollars a month, especially once you get to like the highest dose. So once that price is lowered, then we'll talk. People were like, Amberlynn, semaglutide is Ozempic. So yes, duh. I'm fully aware of that. I have mentioned that ad nauseum in past videos while taking semaglutide. But what I am talking about is compounded semaglutide. That is not FDA approved. That is actually the opposite of FDA approved. The FDA is actually like, you guys need to be aware because some of this is very unsafe. So I'm sorry I didn't say compounded semaglutide in my last weigh-in, but I thought everyone knew what I was talking about because I've only ever taken compounded semaglutide. When I sit here and I say that I'm taking semaglutide, it's because it's compounded.
I mean, it's an FDA process that they approved the compounding pharmacies to do this. It's just that the compounding pharmacies don't need to adhere to the same GMP standards as a typical pharma, and that's in order to make sure that there's enough drug to meet the shortage. However, semaglutide and tirzepatide were both recently taken off of the list of drugs shortages. The compounding pharmacies can't do that anymore. There are some legal battles, but they all seem to have the dust has settled, as it were. And then, I've mentioned before, when we were having this discussion that compounding pharmacies do very important things. It's the services they provide are very important, which is why it's kind of sucks when there was recently an expose of, I think it was called Empower, but it was a compounding pharmacy that got whistleblown on it for doing some shady things, and that really does suck. But I thought I'd clarify that because I was a little too vague in the interview.
Well, and the way Amber talked about the compounded stuff, it almost like she made it sound like, and maybe this is accurate, I don't know, but she made it sound like the stuff you get from your doctor, the Ozempic and the Wegovy and stuff, is the FDA approved, legal versions, and then if you go to the compounding, it almost sounded like she went to the black market to get it, so is there really that big of a difference between, like, if you go to the doctor and get that or like a med spa, is one more dangerous than the other? Or
once again, that kind of gets to the lawsuit area of things because there, some companies are suing some other companies right now. I will say that, like, technically it's not FDA approved. So there's this thing called off-label. So the thing that I showed you before is the label, and every drug has a label, which it says it's approved in this indication with these, if you have this condition with these symptoms and this lab value or whatever, it always has that. And that's the official FDA approval or the official EMA approval, which don't need to be so FDA centric. And that's that's the on-label usage. Off-label usage is a thing that happens, and it's a thing that happens even a physician can do that. It can prescribe a drug off-label, and there are even some international groups, physician group like NICE has some official off-label recommendations. Officially, we can't say you can use this off-label, but off-label, there's a process for it. There's a way it can be done. And so compounding pharmacies, once again, it can be done in an okay way, even if it's not FDA approved. Once again, I don't kind of want to get too much into that because that can get into sort of some legal issues. But something can be technically true, such as you shouldn't take this if you have pancreatitis, but it's being put out there in a way that's not quite, yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
Another thing came up, which is the difference between med spas and compounding pharmacies, relations between them. And because I'm incapable of doing anything concisely, I thought I'd give a really brief background on what the two of them are to make that more clear. So a med spa is kind of like a regular spa plus. So it's a regular spa in the sense of a day spa where they'll give you massages and treatments and hot stones and all that stuff, but they can also do medical cosmetic treatments. So they have a doctor on staff, and they often have registered nurses to do the actual administration of the medications. But they'll do things like as mentioned, the weight loss medications. They also do things like maybe Botox, that sort of thing, medical cosmetic stuff. And they often acquire their cosmetic medications from compounding pharmacies. So a compounding pharmacy is like a pharmacy plus. So it's like a regular retail pharmacy where you go in and you get your pharmacy fill, your prescription filled from your doctor, etc. But they can also do compounded medicines from a prescription. And compounding is like an old school word for mixing up medications. And compounding was the thing that used to be like the thing that apothecaries and pharmacies did back in the old days. You'd go in and say, I need some cocaine, my good man, and they would compound you, with a mortar and pestle and a slurry of propylene glycol, good old days before the FDA. So a compounding pharmacy will do like that plus the other thing, and often these med spas will have a need for compounded drugs in a different format and a different excipient, etc. I've used a compounding pharmacy myself. My dermatologist before put me on retinol wanted me to try a nicotinamide cream. This is just an example, and that's something that a compounding pharmacy has to whip up. It has to put a certain strength into a certain type of topical cream, and my dermatologist gave me a prescription. I took that in the compounding pharmacy, compounded it. And so that's the sort of thing that they'll do. And they can do it, like oftentimes a med spa will have a relationship with a compounding pharmacy where they can get what they need for their clients in whatever format they need that for their clients. So that's the relationship between the two. They are separate, but a med spa will often be a customer of a compounding pharmacy, if that makes sense. We'll often have a relationship with one. And just because, one of the things that hecticana asked was what are some of the things you might want to kind of clarify. And one of the things that kind of comes up in the cosmetic industry quite a bit is this concept of a serum. A serum this, a serum that, this idea that a serum is something that is healing and beneficial, which is kind of funny because a serum is a type of blood product. So there are two types of blood products, serum and plasma. And plasma is what happens when you spin the cells out of blood, and serum is what happens when you spin the cells out and you have the clotting factors clotted out as well. So plasma has the clotting factors, serum doesn't. And the reason why serum has this reputation as being, a very healthy, wonderful thing, and why it's now a branding, as it were, is because back in, once again, the days before such acute treatments were available, a lot of the current targeted treatments, a lot of vaccines, monoclonal antibodies. Before then, something that would often be done is, you would take something very dangerous, very acutely dangerous, like, tetanus toxoid or something, you'd administer it to a large animal, like a goat or a horse, and you would take their blood after they had a chance to have an immune response to it, and you would take the serum, you would spit out the cells, you would clot it out, and you would have what was called an anti-serum, which is a serum full of antibodies against the thing that you administered, and this could often be used as an acute treatment for some of these things that could be treated by being blocked, some of these toxins, some of these poisons. And so serum kind of got this reputation as being a healthful thing, even though it is, in essence, just a blood product with the clotting factors and the cells removed, or a branded cream. So anyway, hope that clears things up, and I hope you have a good day.
One common kind of question or debate that happens when we talk about GLP-1s. I've heard in the comments several people say it's something that you have to take forever, and I've heard some people say that once you take it for a little while and kind of change your lifestyle, you can get off of it and you're good. So what is the general consensus, not by laymen, but professionals? Is it a lifelong thing, or is it something you can just take for a little while until you're good?
That's the general consensus is, yeah, you do. Once you cease taking it, there is generally some weight loss. I mean, weight gain. It isn't always weight gain back to where you were before, but generally speaking, you do put some of that back on. And that's the reason why people are still investigating the mechanism, doing these dual and even new modalities to try to find something that is more robust, or failing that, to find something that's a little bit more tolerable for long-term use. That's where things like the orals are coming into play. It's like that might be something that you can kind of take a little bit more sustainably, because these things do have, they have an effect, and the effect wears off. If they're having an effect in your brain to kind of dampen the food noise, once you stop taking them, the food noise comes back. And these things are, when you talk to people who are struggling with obesity, and I know that Amber and Chantal and all these people kind of make a I don't want to say in mockery, but they kind of it kind of takes away some of the it kind of takes away some of the reality that people really are dealing with things like food noise, and they'd want to not be, and they kind of can take a drug like this and it takes away the food noise, and then they can kind of like turn their attention towards the rest of their life and building up their life, and they do like lose weight and get a much more healthy lifestyle and a much more balanced lifestyle where they have a much healthier relationship with food. And so that's one of those things that, like, when it goes away, I think people are like, oh God, I really miss that feeling of having my brain not do this. It's like antidepressants,
Yeah,
not that I'm comparing the two of them, but just that same idea. It's like I'm on antidepressants for the rest of my life and couldn't be happier.
Yeah, that makes sense. So somebody with food noise, it's not like you take a medication for a little bit, sort of your comparison to antidepressants. Just because somebody takes medication for a little while doesn't mean the depression goes away, so that makes sense. That's a good comparison, I think. Is it generally recommended to take a GLP-1 for a little bit and then stop and then start again and then stop, like Amber has been doing? That seems like it would not be a terribly good idea, but of course I guess the price of it can be prohibitive, but I just don't know, is it dangerous to do something like that?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to tell because it's not generally something that people do. I mean, generally, if people go on these drugs, it's because they want to be on them. And so they go on them, stay on them. And a lot of times, when we have our trials, we have a washout period where it's like, okay, you need to have been 6 months off of your previous GLP-1 in order to be in the trial. And so, it's expected that you have tried it and either worked and you stayed on it, or it didn't work, so you've come off of it and fully flushed it out and you're ready to try something else. So it really is, when you go on a low dose and then you kind of drop off and go back on a low dose again and drop off, but honestly, when it comes to somebody Amber's size, it's so outside of the norm that it's really hard to say anything.
In several of my videos, I have said, I don't think it's really intended for somebody to lose 300 pounds. It's generally for people to lose, 50 to 100 pounds. Is that accurate, or who is the intended patient in one of these with one of these medications?
Yeah, once again, it's unusual to be Amber's size, so I think they kind of leaves that down to the clinician's discretion at that point, because we deal with people, BMI over 30 or 25 with some other indications is generally kind of the population that we're looking at. People with BMI that are higher than my weight is not something that you just normally see and normally plan for, and often uncontrolled eating disorders are an exclusion criteria from trials.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Just because, what are you supposed to do with that? You want to get the eating disorder under control before you start working with the biology.
Well, and it seems like, of course, I don't know, I can't read her mind, but just given her past and given the way she talks about it, it sounds like she is expecting it to be sort of a magic pill that is going to just fix everything and she doesn't have to worry about it anymore. But I mean, generally speaking, if you take GLP-1, you still have to change your lifestyle, right? I mean, you still have to sort of do the work. Is that correct? Or can you just skate by on just the medication itself?
And it makes it much easier because one of the things that it does is it does alter your relationship to food. You don't have that same pleasure with it. And I think that's why she doesn't want to be on it. Is, it's nice to say that you want to go on it and to get, clicks and views and to, get your takeout. But then if you're on it and you no longer get the dopamine hits from food, I think that's not something she's willing to do, So I think it's actually giving people are giving her a lot of credit saying, she thinks this is a magic pill. I think that she thinks this is a magic click aggregator, but she doesn't actually want it to work because if it works, then, what is she if she's not eating?
That's true. Well, and I think that, and again, this is just my opinion, but I think her addiction to food is so strong that her desire for that dopamine hit and that satisfaction she gets from food is so overwhelming. I just don't think she, like you said, I don't think she wants to get rid of it. I just think she enjoys the food noise.
Yeah, I think so too. I fully agree with you. And you have to actually want to change. And even if you don't love yourself to want to change for yourself, you can love someone else enough to want to change for them. Like I was in a position where I would have had a very bad ED, on the other end. But and I didn't love myself enough to check into inpatient. But my sister came to me and was very concerned. And I was like, I love you enough to change. And so, I think you can find something to want to change, and in doing so and in getting some therapy, you can learn to love yourself enough to want to change. But it's like you have to love yourself or someone else enough to want to change. That is not my expert biological opinion. That's my opinion
No,
as a human.
I absolutely agree. She says a lot about her gallbladder, and she said that she was denied GLP-1 from this most recent telehealth clinic or whatever, and it was because of her gallbladder. Is that normal? Would you be denied because of gallbladder issues?
Okay, so kind of two things on why. One of them is the sort of the general Amber thing, which is, to my mind, and once again, this is not my professional opinion. This is just an opinion from something I've seen the compilations of her over the years. She sort of seems to be the queen of incidental findings, and incidental findings are things that come up when you're looking for something else. So humans are messy bags of gunk, and we often have things wrong with us or just things that are outside of the sort of the reference range of standard that aren't a problem because they're not a problem, and they're only a problem if they're causing symptoms or causing an issue. Like I was getting my kidneys, I was getting an ultrasound for my bottom surgery, and I'm transgender, I should mention, and they found that I have a double kidney on my left. That's an incidental finding. It's something that's weird. It's something that's anomalous, but it's not really a problem because it's not causing me any concerns. There's no symptoms. There's no pain. There's no nothing. And so she's even said it. She's like, so many people have gallstones and they don't even know. And it's like, yeah, they don't know because it's not a problem, and it's not a problem for her. She just has incidental gallstones, and because she bugs people and bugs people and bugs people to give her scans when she's in the ER, she finds things to say, oh, I've got this, I've got that. Yeah. And she even did it with Jade. I remember she was like, she's got something in her foot. I didn't even know. We didn't even know she's got something in her foot. And it's like, yeah, we all got random fragments of bone and cartilage and shit floating around. We just normally don't know.
And it was very much like plantar fasciitis or whatever that word is. It was giving that. And so she ended up going to a foot doctor who then scheduled her for an MRI. So she got the MRI. One of her feet has an object inside of it, and they don't know what it is, and they're not concerned with it. There's an object in her foot. You can't feel it, you can't see it, nothing. You can only see it in the MRI. But they said that it's not a concern, and it's not what's causing her pain or anything like that. They still don't know what's wrong with her foot. And we're over here we were shocked. Like, an object in your foot that you don't know about? What type of object? What are you talking about? A toy? Metal? What is happening? I just wanted to tell you guys that because that is just the craziest thing.
And so that's kind of one thing. And the other thing is, so I can share something right here, if that's okay. Sure. So this is what is called the product insert. It's basically in any drug, you'll have something like this from the FDA, you'll have something like this from the EMA, and fortunately, they tend to be much more aligned these days, but you'll have these two sorts of warnings. You'll have these warnings and precautions here, and the warnings and precautions are things that have been seen in the trials, not necessarily related to the drug, but things you want to have a watch out for. And then there's another category, and it's called a black box warning. And the reason it's called a black box warning is because it's in a black box. We're very simple folk. And so those are the things where it's like these things do seem to be related. And so these are the big watch outs. So the black box warning, this is for semaglutide, is for thyroid T cell tumors, medullary cell carcinoma. And so this is a type of cancer that you can get that is completely unrelated to uterine cancer. So this is kind of the only real black box warning. There are some warnings and precautions around, and it is true. So this is something that she does. She takes like some random thing she's seen on the internet and makes a big thing of it. It's true that pancreatitis has been noted, diabetic retinopathy, etc., hypoglycemia, probably not something she has to worry about, acute kidney injury, and hypersensitivity, all this sort of thing. So this is the ramp up schedule, and you get to dosage 1 mg because this is semaglutide. But yeah, so it has some things about, about pancreatitis.
Well, and she has mentioned her pancreas before, but she doesn't really say what the issue is. She just says my pancreas. But
and unfortunately, my doctor told me that I can't do that due to my pancreas and gallstone issues that I've had in the past. Issues with like my gallbladder and pancreas, but then also having issues with lipedema and lymphedema. See, the whole thing with Ozempic is like, I didn't choose to stop taking it. I was like advised to stop taking it by my doctor because of my pancreas and my gallbladder.
And these are the contraindications, these are the things that they'll absolutely deny you for. A history of thyroid carcinoma and known hypersensitivity. Those are the things they'll deny you for.
And I was able to find where it talked about gallbladder issues with Ozempic. And we don't know for sure what kind of quote unquote gallbladder problems Amber has. But what Ozempic says about it is acute events of gallbladder disease, such as these two, have been reported in GLP-1 receptor agonist trials and post-marketing in placebo-controlled trials. One of those was reported in 1.5% and 0.4% of patients treated with Ozempic. And so whenever he says that she is the queen of incidental findings, this is kind of what he's talking about, right? This is such a small number, but somehow it happened to Amber, just like everything. And this is all I could really find as far as interactions with the gallbladder and GLP-1. Another interesting thing that Amber seems to do is while she's on the medication, she seems to gain weight. How common is that? Is that even is that even possible that you can eat more enough to gain weight?
Once again, and that's another thing that makes me think that she's not up titrating, because when you start off once again at this very low sub-efficacious dose, and which is meant to kind of give you over the hump of tolerability until you can ramp up to the efficacious dose.
And by efficacious dose, he basically just means the dose where the medication starts working. They also tend to call it the effective dose. So when he says sub-efficacious dose, those are like the early doses to sort of get it in your system and to see if there are any like side effects or if your body reacts to it in a negative way or something like that. And then you ramp up to the efficacious dose. So it seems very likely that Amber just stayed at the sub-efficacious dose or the sub-effective dose and never ramped up enough for it to actually do anything.
When people are on trials, they drop weight, and they drop weight fast. And it doesn't matter. Like and I should mention, I don't have anything to do with Sema. I don't work for that company or anything around that. But, it doesn't matter. Any of the trials of these GLP-1 receptor agonists, when people are on the trial, they drop weight. And of course, they do it in the context of, everything to do with cardiovascular metabolism, obesity. It's done in the context of advice on healthy lifestyle in terms of diet and exercise. Sometimes it's, some places will give you a lot of support in the form of a dietitian and a physical therapist. Some will just say, here are some helpful guidelines. But it's always like, this should be done with a reasonable diet and a reasonable exercise. But yeah, when they get on the trial, people lose weight. And we talk about non-responders and super responders, but the non-responders don't gain.
And how long does it usually take to get up to that efficacious dose?
It varies person to person because some people don't have to ramp up as fast. Usually people need to get up to the 1, and that's, 4 weeks on the 0.25, 4 weeks on the 5, and then 4 weeks on the 1, and then you ramp up to the 2.4 for Wegovy.
Up to that point, are they already seeing results, generally speaking, or do they have to sort of buy their time until they get to that dose to start
Once
losing
again,
weight?
it's hard to tell because most people are motivated.
That's true.
Most people who are on the drug are actually motivated, and
And they're just
so
using it as a tool.
they're using it as a tool. So even if they don't start to lose right away, they generally don't gain right away. They generally, start to lose, and then once it kicks in, they really lose.
So what are the I don't know if there's any dangers necessarily, but she also mentioned that she's vaping Delta 8 while she's on the medication, which seems counterintuitive, I would think. But is there any danger in mixing those kinds of, substances?
I mean, just generally as a blanket recommendation, we'd say don't, because, just as a blanket recommendation, we say don't vape because it's not good for your lungs and that stuff isn't regulated. And so it can be, who knows what it can, kind of long-term damage it does to your lungs. But just in general, marijuana does give you the munchies usually. So, why do it? It's just generally advisable not to. And I don't know of any studies ongoing to say what is the, consequence of both doing marijuana and doing semaglutide at the same time. You can go to Novo Nordisk and ask if they're running those.
Yeah, well, and I wonder how common that is. I imagine not very. That people are starting the drug that's so expensive and trying to change their life, and then they're also vaping Delta 8. I doubt that's very common.
Yeah, and if they are doing that, getting it over the counter and getting their Delta 8, I imagine they're not actually being honest with their healthcare providers about it, unfortunately. So it's hard to tell.
We kind of talked about her stopping and starting and stuff. You said that generally just doesn't happen, but is it dangerous to do that, or do you know? I mean, have there been any really studies to know what happens if you start and stop it?
Be some sort of people out in the field, some clinicians out in the field, and I'm not a clinician, I'm a biomarker scientist.
Right.
There might be some clinicians out in the field who have more experience with that, but I just don't know.
It seems like it wouldn't be a good idea, but
It seems like it wouldn't be a good idea, but I don't know how actively harmful it is, especially when she's not really up titrating.
yeah. So,
She's staying on such a low dose.
Yeah. There was a person that actually asked. They are actually on Ozempic, and they asked if it can change your taste, like the way food tastes. They said it's not like a concern. They were just they noticed it and they thought it was weird. Is that pretty normal?
So once again, the way it acts in the brain is kind of, and the way it acts on your tastes and your appetite towards food is highly variable. It's very different individual to individual, and so that's not uncommon. And I had a friend who was on it for a while, and she was saying that when she was on it, it took away like any kind of you would look at food and instead of like, oh, that would be tasty, it's just like blank, nothing.
Yeah, it's just a thing.
So yeah. I've never been on it myself. So
those were kind of the main questions as far as GLP-1 goes. Is there anything else that you have heard or, maybe some misinformation that you've read that you'd like to correct, or anything you'd like to just get out there on GLP-1 before we move on to lymphedema and stuff?
and then just as I don't know if the previous disclaimer will make it in, but just to say, once again, I'm just speaking right now as a personal private citizen. I'm not speaking on behalf of any organizations, any other people. I'm just talking out of my own behind. But just some of the things that I've kind of heard on social media, things like, it only makes you lose weight because of the side effects, because of the vomiting and the nausea and all of that. Generally speaking, what we're trying to do is we're trying to make the side effects as mild as possible through tinkering with the molecule, through the dosing schedule, in order to kind of get to a steady state where it's not giving you nausea, where you're feeling okay, where you're feeling good, but where it's just, you're feeling better without having to eat so much, where the food isn't, such a driver for you.
And speaking of side effects, a common thing I hear is we just don't know what the long-term side effects would be, because it seems like it's been sort of blowing up here just in the last year or so. I guess, how long have people really been taking it, and what kind of concerns would there be for long-term? I mean, obviously we can't see into the future, but is that a real serious, like if somebody's thinking about it and they're like, I just don't know what the long-term side effects are. Is that something they should be really concerned about?
And that's why I kind of wanted to mention that these drugs have been around for longer than people think. Just because semaglutide was kind of the big one that really exploded, there was there were peptides before then that were used primarily for type 2 diabetes. And of course, the long-term studies are coming out. 5 years, 10 years is coming up. And once again, I don't want to speak too much out of pocket. You can just go look at the phase threes. But so far, the long-term effects have been shockingly positive. It's like it's helping to prevent CKD. It's helping to reduce, increase people's heart function. It's helping to improve people's kidney function. And some of that is probably secondary to weight loss and glycemic control, and some of it might be primary to the mechanism of action of the drug itself. There's no such thing as a drug that is 100% safe, but there is no such thing as a thing you do in your life that is 100% safe. I love to run, and it is not 100% safe, and my knees will tell you that.
Yeah. Everything has risks.
And so I will not tell you to take it, and I will not tell you to not take it. That's the decision you should make with your healthcare provider.
Okay, so as far as lymphedema goes, tell me, like, how does lymphedema work? Like, how does somebody get lymphedema? Is it something you're born with, or how generally does that happen?
Yeah, so lymphedema. So when you think about most people, when you say the circulatory system, they think about the blood. So the lymph is actually a second circulatory system in your body, and it doesn't have the red blood cells, which is why it is the lymph, which is the actual liquid, is clear rather than red. But it is a circulatory system, and it takes immune cells through the body. Unlike the arterial blood system, it doesn't have the heart to pump it through. In fact, once you get to the vein, the venous blood system, even that really doesn't benefit as much from the heart pumping. And actually, the veins have a one-way valve, so that as you kind of walk and do your regular movements throughout the day, your blood vessels get squeezed, and because the veins have these one-way valves, it kind of forces the blood back through the heart and kind of augments it. The lymphatic system doesn't have a heart pumping it, and it relies much more on kind of movements and squeezing and to move fluid around. And it carries immune cells through the body. And if you've heard of lymph nodes, of course, these nodes are these sort of little organs that sit at certain specific points in the lymphatic system, and they serve as sort of this. Once again, my immunology nerd wants to come out and talk about, these crazy things that B cells do in the lymph nodes, where they mutate their DNA, and you have these little Darwinian evolution systems in the lymph nodes, which is why they swell up when you are sick. But anyway, that's
wild.
It is.
The body is truly wonderful. A mysterious thing, for sure.
It's wonderful. I love it. It's why I'm into immunology, because the immune system is just one of the most weirdest and interesting systems in the body. But so this lymphatic system relies on the circulation of lymph. And there is actually, it's funny that you said born with it, because there are some very rare genetic conditions where you have this primary lymphedema, but they're very, very rare. And so generally speaking, you get lymphedema because your lymphatic system has been blocked in some way, shape, or form. One really common way it happens actually is when people have breast cancer and they have a mastectomy and they have some of their lymph nodes removed because the cancer has metastasized to lymph nodes. It takes the cancer away, but then that's a blockage of their lymphatic system, and they can get lymphedema because their lymphatic system was blocked by taking out these lymph nodes. And it's a rare risk, but it is a risk with some other surgeries as well, where it's like if you happen to kind of get through a lymphatic vessel somewhere, you can cause a blockage. Obesity is a risk because you get so big that the adipose tissue squeezes the lymphatic vessels and blocks them, and then you get the swelling because the lymph can't move through the body properly. And that's why when they talk about this treatment being either lymphatic drainage, where they actually go in with a needle and suck the lymphatic fluid out, or lymphatic massage, when you try to force the lymph back through the system so it can circulate again. But when you do have lymphedema, it causes swelling, it causes pain, it stretches the skin, so the skin gets very thin, and it can cause the skin to crack.
Yeah.
So when you walk through a flood,
or
step in a puddle.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, or if you have dirty sheets, that could be a possibility. What's the difference between lymphedema and lipedema?
I know about one, and I am not an expert in the other.
Okay, so
So edema.
so they're different enough that you can specialize in one and not really have much experience with the other.
Yeah, so edema is just a word that means swelling. And it's just a happenstance that lymph and lipid are very similar words, because lipid is, adipose cells. It's fat, and lymphedema that's the actual lymphatic fluid. And so, I know quite a bit about lymph and lymphoid system, and the lymphedema, the swelling, the lymph nodes, all that stuff. And I know very little about lipedema.
I think a lot of people sort of assume that they're similar or the same thing because they tend to show up in legs, or that's generally when people talk about it, it's happening in their legs. So
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Like for obese people, it does tend to show up in their legs, but people with breast cancer, it shows up in their arms or their chest. It is all where the blockage occurs.
so you mentioned the lymphatic massages and stuff. Is that something that somebody like has to do? I know you said there's the drainage and then the massages. If they don't do that, what happens? I mean, does it just keep getting worse and worse, or does it just not get better?
It can get worse and worse.
So it's recommended to do those.
Yeah,
I mean, and I know you're not
honestly,
a physician, but how often generally do people need to do those kinds of things? Do you know?
yeah, I don't know the frequency. That would be something more for your kind of your not even physical therapist, somebody who specializes clinically in these things to deal with. But you do have to do it, and generally speaking, people once again, it's the thing where people are generally very motivated to do it because it is so painful and it has such an impact on quality of life. And there are some non-responders to that, like where it's just no matter how much they do do the massage, no matter how much they do the drainage, it's like it doesn't resolve. And so there are trials now for drugs that might help with that, but that's around the background of people who are really putting in the work.
And when he says non-responder, that just basically means somebody who is doing the treatment or taking the medication or doing whatever they're supposed to be doing, but it's not working. So that's why he said it's off the back of people who are actually putting in the work. Because it's not like non-responder means that they're just not doing it. It's that they are trying and it's not working. One thing I noticed when I was kind of looking into it is lymphedema tends to, as far as in the legs, it tends to happen in one leg more than both. Is that a thing, or because I think they called it bilateral lymphedema, where you have it in both legs. Is that pretty common to have it in both, or is it just, can it happen anywhere?
Yeah.
Really?
Once again, that's kind of a thing where it's like my experience is more with people who have had it not due to, unusual levels of obesity. So it is a little bit hard for me to judge. It's like I'm used to having in the context of people who have had a surgery, who have had their lymph nodes removed, and therefore there's a reason that they only have it in one spot. When somebody gets to 600 plus pounds, that's just so far out of the experience.
So
I will say that I hear her talk a lot more about lipedema, and I know she likes to conflate the two of them, but she talks about like the diet, the low carb diet, and then she like tries to conflate it and saying low carb, high fat, and it's like no.
she talks about the diet and that her doctor said she can't have high fat because of her, and she says lipedema and lymphedema. Can a diet help with lymphedema? Like, is there a specific diet that is recommended for lymphedema?
I mean, you don't want a lot of salt. You want to avoid the sodium because sodium, it just upsets your salt balance and it makes it harder for your fluid balance to be, in a good place, and that just makes it worse. So you definitely want to avoid sodium, which we know she's just great at, and of course she can't tolerate a high-fat diet, which is why she's going to Cracker Barrel. So
Right. Does fat affect lymphedema at all?
I don't know if that's been looked at to a great extent. Most of the most studies I've seen have been around sodium.
So chances are her doctor would not recommend her a high fat diet for lymphedema.
Yeah, and the big thing is like she likes to talk to doctors in isolation. Should like there's the concept of a care team, and the concept of a care team is like it's not something that's revolutionary. It's just this idea that your dietitian, your lymphedema specialist, your all these people should be talking with each other, and they should come up with a comprehensive plan for you. And if you go talk to this person and then isolation, and then talk to this person in isolation, and then this person in isolation, then you get to come online and say, oh, everybody's saying something different, and I just don't know what to do. And it's like, what you need to do is get people talking to each other. And if you really care about your health, that's something that's very important to do. And it is very frustrating because there are people who really want to have that sort of care team, and they don't have the money and they don't have the resources that she has.
Yeah. And it is frustrating to see just how stubborn somebody with the means and resources to get things taken care of just refuse to do it. Lymphedema, is it more or less common in obese people, or is it just, I mean, you mentioned the cancer, the breast cancer where the lymph nodes were removed. But in my experience or what I've seen online, most people that talk about lymphedema, of course, and I may be conflating lymphedema and lipedema as well, but it seems like when that topic is brought up, it is brought up mostly talking about obese people or, people that you would look at them and go, yeah, I can see them having one of those things. So is it more common in obese people?
Yeah, absolutely. Obesity is a risk factor.
Okay.
It's a substantial risk factor. And it's probably one of the most modifiable things you can do.
Yeah, you'd think. Of course, according to Amber, lymphedema and lipedema are the things that are causing her not to be able to lose weight. Is it impossible to lose weight with lymphedema?
Oh, definitely not with lymphedema. I know that with lymphedema, it can be trickier, and it can be trickier. And once again, I'm not an expert on that side of things. I'm an expert on this side of things,
Right.
and I'm not a clinical expert on this side of things. I'm an immunologist on this side of things. But like, there's nothing about having an excess of lymph in your body that affects. The only way in which it probably could is if it makes it harder for you to move. Because that can definitely be a thing. If it makes it harder for you to exercise, then it makes it harder for you to lose weight. But it doesn't prevent a calorie deficit from making you lose weight.
So I'm guessing if she wants to sort of spin this narrative that her leg issues are causing her not to be able to lose weight, she probably should focus on the lipedema rather than the lymphedema, because the lymphedema really doesn't affect her too much as far as her diet.
Yeah, it's kind of the other way around. It's like, losing weight would help with the lymphedema.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of things that would help her that she just doesn't want to do.
Yeah. Yeah. So cellulitis, do you know much about cellulitis, or does that have anything to do with lymphedema or anything?
I'm the skinny person who's had cellulitis. Actually, so I had ACL surgery, and the wounds, the surgical wound did get infected when I was hitting the gym too hard, and my surgeon was like, "Don't go to the gym; it's filthy." And I'm like, but yeah, so it does, like I was saying, it stretches the skin. It can make the skin crack. It's harder, and it leads to more places where bacteria can get in. When I talk about the immune system, one of the skin is actually an immune organ. It's a physical barrier, but it's also an immunological barrier. There's a lot of cells and cytokines inside of the skin that actually do a lot of work to keep you safe from the outside world. And so when you start to get these breaks in the skin, you're actually affecting one of your immune organs.
So she did have a hysterectomy. Would that have any effect on lymph nodes? Would there be, because you mentioned breast cancer surgery, but a hysterectomy, would that have anything to do with lymph nodes, or would that affect her at all?
Once again, with any surgery, there's a possibility, but then you would get it where the surgery was. Yeah, and it's kind of funny because I've had that, so I don't know if I mentioned that I'm transgender, but I've actually had a hysterectomy, and I had the laparoscopic hysterectomy, which is the way to go. But when you're that size, you just can't have laparoscopic surgery in the same way.
If somebody that's obese was going to get lymphedema, then probably most likely because of the adipose tissue squeezing the lymph, like the lymph node system and stuff.
The degree of obesity, especially that degree of obesity, is a substantial risk factor. I would look to that first.
So is there anything about lymphedema that you've heard that you'd like to correct, or anything that you think is interesting, or that maybe Amber has said that you disagree with?
It's a different animal from lipedema. That's the big thing. Is like, you conflate the two of them, and I've heard people just say lymphedema, which I think is great because then you can just kind of not worry about which one you're talking about. But yeah, and I think she mentioned, it's water weight, it's retention of water, and I think that kind of downplays this issue that you are affecting the ability of your immune cells to circulate properly through your body, and that's the sort of thing that would make me wake up in a cold sweat.
Yeah, yeah, you'd think. I mean, and there have been so many you'd think would be wake up calls, that she just kind of ignores, and it's baffling, and it's and of course I don't wish anything to happen to her, and I hope that she turns things around and wakes up one day and realizes how serious things really are. But it just seems like she is determined not to do what she needs to do to take care of herself. And the GLP-1 is a great example of that, where she could easily, like we were talking about people with the means and resources to take care of themselves. She has that, and she's able to do what so many people wish they could do, and she just doesn't stick with it. And I think, like you said, I agree that to her, it's more about enjoying food than losing weight.
Honestly, one of the things I enjoy about, one of the reasons I'm in Girl World at all is like, it's kind of like, I'm on these podcasts where they review awful movies, and that sort of thing. And it's like when you see something, sometimes seeing something not good makes you appreciate things that really are good, or makes you realize how you could do things better and all that. And so for me, that's what Girl World is all about. It's about like, seeing, what are these behaviors that I see like the nascent bubblings up in myself that I could change and be a better person myself. What is it about good relationships that makes them good that I can learn from seeing these toxic relationships? What is it about, being a better person? Because to me, like, once again, the fact that she's fat, the fact that Chantal's fat is not what makes them disliked. It's not what makes them toxic. There are some wonderful, beautiful fat people in my life. And it's just the fact that they're so toxic and so it's just almost like a spectacle,
Yeah.
how toxic they are. And it kind of makes me appreciate the wonderful people in my life and kind of enjoy, and kind of see what it means to be a good person and to be in a good relationship, whether that be a romantic relationship or a friendship relationship or even an online relationship, just kind of an online community that is positive by seeing what happens or what it looks like when it's not.
Yeah, absolutely. And it can be a motivation too. In fact, back in 2018, 2019, I got to almost to 300 pounds, and I decided I didn't want to do that anymore. Started going to the gym and watching what I was eating. And that's when I discovered Amberlynn. I was on the treadmill and it just got in my feed somehow. I think it was Mr. Snowflake was one of my first videos. I jumped down the rabbit hole, and that's what I'd watch at the gym and stuff. And it really is kind of a cautionary tale. No matter how much they want to say that it's just fat phobia and how people hate them because of their size, it's far deeper than that. If they didn't behave the way they did, they would not receive nearly as much hate as they do, I don't think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because I found it through Snowflake as well, because I was looking into a completely non-goal world documentary he had done, and then I saw Shaped by the Algorithm, and I was like, oh, this is interesting. So I joined during the Jade era, which I know people think is like, and it is kind of one of the most boring eras, but it was interesting in the sense that you saw some of these sort of audience manipulation tactics that she does, sort of her starting to really hone them, as it were, and now she's really starting to like get rolling with them, as it
Yeah.
were.
Oh yeah, for sure. Especially when she kind of had to carry things on her own and try to make excuses for everything she does and not have a scapegoat. It kind of gave her practice and kind of a testing ground for all of her manipulation and stuff, and to kind of perfect it at this point. Because, man, she is an expert at manipulation and deflection and stuff like that.
It is something to see, and it is something because like I've seen some retro things pop up on my feed from the early Jade era, and it is interesting to see that it did seem like Jade was trying, because she was doing things like parceling out serving sizes of snacks and baggies. She was cooking like home cooked meals for Amber and all that, and then by the end, Amber was just doing her thing and eating her takeout, and it's like, what do you do? You know?
Yeah, yeah. If you don't want it, it's just not going to happen. So, well, is there anything in closing that you'd like to just get off your chest, or just, you know, let Girl World know, or anything that you think is interesting that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I'd like to ramble for an hour about immunology, about B cells, about affinity maturation. I will say, you know, get your boosters; they're great. Uh, other than that, I really enjoy the community. I enjoy what you've been doing. I watch, there's a reaction channel or a compilation channel called Jordy's Curved Thumb that kind of cuts down
Yeah.
Jordy's reactions. And sometimes they have her saying hecticana, and then they cut to you going, hey, cracks me up. So I
Yeah.
really just enjoy the content.
Jordy's Curved Thumb was actually the very first shout out I got whenever I first started my channel. They said there's a new reactor, and so I'll always appreciate them for that. But well, thank you so much for talking to me. I appreciate you reaching out and you know, getting good information out into Girl World to make sure that the misinformation is at least curbed a little bit is always good. So I really appreciate you, and thank you very much.
Thank you. And I had a lot of fun. And this was for entertainment purposes only, not intended to diagnose, cure, treat any disease.
Yep. So, all right. Well, thank you very much. And I hope you have a great day and take care.
See you. Bye-bye.
See you. So I hope you learned as much as I did, and I hope you enjoyed the interview. I think my kind of takeaway is Amber was supposed to ramp up much faster than she did on the semaglutide. So it never really got a chance to do what it was supposed to do, all 3 times that she's done it. And then on the lymphedema side, she uses it as an excuse rather than a motivation, right? There are ways that she could alleviate any kind of issues with lymphedema, but doesn't really do anything. And I think she doesn't do anything because she then blames her lipedema. And now that she's been diagnosed with hypothyroidism, I think she just has the perfect storm of excuses, so that if she's supposed to do one thing for this, she can say, well, I can't because of this. Well, but you could do this for that, but I can't because I have this other thing. And so she has every base covered with excuses. But that's just my thought, just my opinion. Let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll see you next time. I appreciate you guys so much. Take care.